to it. There we go. There we go. So, so we get this sort of Rahu and Ketu polarity, and they're kind of like the jokers in the deck. They work together all the time. We have in astrology, we have like a Ketu period or we have a Rahu period, but somehow these two are always working together. And Rahu is like, he's the one that captures our attention. We can't take our eyes away from Rahu. We're fascinated. We're pulled into it regardless of how we feel, what we think. It's just this magnet that just draws us in. We don't know why. And Ketu is what's behind us while we're looking at Rahu. Ketu is, like I say sometimes, it's the two thieves who work together. One sort of dances and juggles in front of us while the other one goes in behind and cleans us out. And that's kind of what Rahu and Ketu are. So, and well, really, Rahu is the one who makes karma for us. In astrology, if you go through a Rahu period, we do a bunch of things, but we don't really know why. We're just kind of drawn to do them, but we kind of mess them up somehow. By mess them up, it's not like it's always a bad period. Sometimes we reach great heights and we do really great things in Rahu periods because we get out of our own little box. But in doing that, we kind of make karma for ourselves. We do some things that are going to have to be cleaned up later somehow in our life. And well, Rahu and Ketu, I think, are probably two of the most powerful karmic planets, karmic energies. And so often happens, we go through a Rahu period, we do some things, and karma is kind of like a debt. And so we do something, that energy is not completed somehow. That exchange isn't equal, it's not fulfilled. And so whenever the exchange isn't equal, whenever it's not, whenever it's not just burning karma or paying the debt, it's like, you go to the shop and he's got a price tag there and you just pay it. Right. And it's an even exchange and you walk away and you don't owe each other anything. But if you go to the shop and you pull out your wallet and you have no money and the shopkeeper says, oh, here, well, just take the water anyways, you walk away from there and you have a debt to that person. And that's not always a bad thing. Right? We, in a sense, everything we have in life is because of some karmic debt we're trying to pay back. Now, this is where Rahu and Ketu are kind of interesting because they're demons, but they're the ones who make all of our karma. Now, really, if we go back to say the first part of this on the tattvas, I mentioned this a little bit last class, but Rahu and Ketu represent that first separation of sort of individuality from pure consciousness, from that oneness to this. They almost describe it in Tantra as this desire, this subtle desire. And as soon as God had that desire, then there was this split. And so it's sort of that, in that way, it's sort of this original sin kind of idea. Because all of a sudden there's two things, they get tainted. Even when this is an interesting thing also about Rahu and Ketu is, so when they're churning the ocean of milk, when they're creating something, bringing something new into this world, first thing that comes up is this poison, this sort of toxicity. This Vashuki throws up, and I think some more poison comes out of the ocean itself. And this is kind of like anything we do is going to have, and we try something new, any activity we undertake is going to have this slight, the pollution to it. It's going to have this slight toxicity to it. And this is why the elders were always like, just don't do anything kind of thing, just the way society is now. It's good, it's fine. Let's just live in the jungle and be cavemen and be happy we have it. Right. And all the youngsters were like, no, we want change. Right. And so they brought all this change without really fully realizing some of the consequences, right, we're dealing with now. A lot of the pollution and things like this, like cars are great. I love cars, man. They're wonderful, right? But we all know the kind of pollution, our phones, this connectivity we have, it's wonderful. But there's all these sort of hidden consequences to it. That's kind of what the Rahu and Ketu are. These sort of hidden consequences that we're just not seeing at the time. We're just sort of Rahu fascinated by, oh wow, cars. Can you imagine this? Like you don't need a horse, you just hop in a buggy and it takes you away. Like, wow. Right. And so you get carried away with this, but all the little things that come after, it's like, oh geez, I don't know if that's quite the price I wanted to pay for this. Even early, the people, Henry Ford and those guys making the cars, I'm sure if they saw it today, they'd go, oh wow, made a lot of money, but wow, it's a heavy price. So that's kind of the Rahu and Ketu. Ketu is, well, he's the one that's extinguishing those karmas. So we go into Ketu period, and those things sort of get extinguished. Ketu is, he's a white, clear mist. Rahu is just dark, thick, oily smoke that leaves his residue everywhere. That residue is the karma. You could say that thick, oily layer that he sort of leaves. And Ketu is this pure smoke, this pure fire that leaves the clear white ash. Like that pure, there's nothing, the residue that's left over is as pure as it can be, you could say, with Ketu. Whereas Rahu is always kind of, he's leaving something behind. Something more has to be done here. Have to clean that up. And then usually what happens in cleaning up one karma, we make another karma and we make another karma. We're constantly making all these karmas. Now, the other thing then, we hear a lot of talk about like the good karmas or the bad karmas. Like, oh, you're gonna make these sort of good karmas for ourselves and everything will be all right. Well, good karmas are certainly better than bad karmas, no doubt. But if sort of freedom is the goal, then karma is karma. Liberation, if moksha, if all of this is the goal, those uh, really higher goals for ourselves, I guess, in a sense, then karma is karma, whether it's good or it's bad. And so what we want is that karmic neutrality. Like when we go and we buy that bottle of water for what the price says, and we just walk away and sort of forget each other. It's gone. It's done. Now, this is what makes the spiritual path and the material path so difficult because, well, if your spiritual path is to burn karmas, a lot of what our relationships and our jobs and our careers and a lot of this sort of material life is, these are karmas. These are the activities that we have to sort of complete. And in a sense, we're sort of bound to them in a certain way until they fall away. It's like you can't just like run away from your family and your job and your duties and go live in the Himalayas because all those karmas are going to follow you. They're not, you didn't complete them. You didn't do your duties. That's kind of sad. It's very Saturnius also, of course. But once you complete those karmas, it's like once the children sort of grow up and they have that life of their own, and this is sort of the traditional path in India, it's like once the family's kind of good on their own and maybe that oldest son is good enough, you can give him the farm and go and retire. And you're done with your karmas. You can go and take sannyas when you're old and all those duties are completed. And I guess in my case, and maybe in some of our other cases, I have no children. I have no family. I never had those. Fate didn't give me those karmas early. Because I think what happens to a lot of people is they take on a lot of these burdens of, well, even careers can be a kind of karma, but they take on the job and the family and they do all of that before they have ever realized any freedom, right? And so they feel very stuck. They feel very bound in all of that. And they can't get out of it. And oh God, why like this? But these are sort of those, well, Rahu and Ketu are really those reptilian karmas we have from way back in sort of ancient times. A lot of those, the original desire is Rahu. Like, why do we suddenly feel these strong urges that come up for whatever it might be? We all have them in some direction of our lives. We all have a Rahu. And so it's kind of like these are the urges that sort of keep us here. They keep the karma, they keep the wheels turning. If the wheels weren't turning, there'd be nothing here. We wouldn't exist. If we have no Rahu Ketu karma, well, nothing has karma. And in a big way, it's Rahu and Ketu who sort of connect us to everything else. Well, because really all the other energies, they're very bound. And we're the sort of like, we feel very bound in this body as well. But it's Rahu and Ketu that are beyond this body, beyond this sort of material reality. And so it's like they're these demons because they separate. And I think I've mentioned before, as far as I can figure from astrology and a lot of this, like evil energy is anything that separates, and spiritual energy is anything that unites and brings everything together, generally. And so that's why Rahu and Ketu are these demons, because they separate. But it's also that separation that makes all of this experience possible. And so that's why you could say, as sort of tantrics or nature lovers or Shiva workers or energy workers, we look at this separation, we look at this, well, we look psychologically at these urges, and we look at our own inner lives to try to get to those sort of source points, which is kind of Ketu can be a source point in a sense. And so when we get back to that source point is kind of where well, that's where our mind kind of gets blown, right? We're like, well, who am I? And you take that back to the smallest denominator, and suddenly the mind sort of frizzles out and you go, oh God, I'm really nothing. Or you take it the other way and you go, wow, I'm everything. And the mind goes boom. Those booms at the end of both of those are the Ketu energies, where you just like, it's just magic and wonder at that point, which is really Rahu and Ketu are also, they're that magic and wonder of life, those things that are seen beyond reality, the miracles, the wow, Rahu is the illusion, the great Maya Devi. Like even this funky way, the light is kind of hitting me through these bars. You can see the streams of light. I was doing this. No, it's not working. And so it's just sort of magic and illusion. It's this cloak, in a sense, and really it's that cloak of individuality at the most sort of deepest sense. Now, this is where, I guess you could say, ego comes in. And if we think of the sun is like who you are. It's a sort of pure expression of ego, you could say. It's not sort of that ugly ego. Where Rahu is this sort of uglier ego, because it's always going to make you think that you're much more than you really are, because he has no boundaries. And so you always think you can get beyond yourself. And so we do in Rahu times, we get in over our heads. We start to feel like we're drowning a little bit. Of course, we'll meet lots of clients that are like this. They come to us, they're like, wow, I'm drowning in life. I can't deal with it. And that's the Rahu. It's interesting. There's common advice for Rahu and Ketu. And so Ketu, we always say, well, you have to learn to let go in Ketu periods. That's the most common: surrender, let go, release. Rahu periods, like, you always think they're opposite. And Rahu periods, like you want to hold on in a Rahu period, in a sense. And I always wondered about this. And it's like, well, Rahu is that energy of Durga, the power goddess, riding on the lion. And so it's like, if you want power, if you want to get in over your head, you have to hold on, because that's all you can do, because that tiger is just going to take you where it wants. And so Sanjay used to talk about, he said, Mike, power is something you have to be able to ride the tiger. And he said to me, he said, if I won $1 million, he said, it would be the worst thing that ever happened in my life. He said, in 1 month, it would be gone. People would cheat me from it. They would steal it. They'd be out of my hands. And then I would feel guilty for the rest of my life. And he says, I don't have the power to control $1 million. And so that's kind of what Rahu is. It's just like you get in over your head, and all you can do is really hold on in a Rahu period. And we all have those periods of our lives as well. And it's kind of a funny way of looking at things, right? You got to let go of that, and you just like hang on and go for the ride in a Rahu, because it's going to be a ride. And so well, they usually say the remedy for Rahu is to pray to Durga, right? She's the one who teaches you how to ride the lion, ride the power. Um, and so they're very interesting how these planets work. While the magic and mysticism, I sometimes get confused over what I've said in this course and what I say other places because I'm always kind of talking this, but Rahu and Ketu, they don't really exist, right? They're just mathematical points in the sky. Only we see the effect when the sun and the moon kind of align over them, we get periods of eclipse. And so we see their effect, and so we're able to track them that way. And Rahu and Ketu kind of act the same way. These are those like phobias in the mind, and these are those things that, especially Rahu, these things that aren't real. We're kind of fooled or tricked, or there's some illusion in life, something we're not seeing, or usually with Rahu, something we're sort of not letting ourselves see because we're too busy looking in one place. And so that's a sort of Rahu energy. And so it's this sort of trick, this phobia. They act through the mind. They're not really real things. And so then they get called ghosts. They get called magicians, demons, phobias, fears, sort of that irrationality that we have. And we're all kind of irrational about something, like, oh my God, a spider, right? It's like this stupid little, it's nothing, or whatever it is. We have these sort of clouds. We don't see things for really what they are. And that's really what the Rahu is. And of course, I talk in astrology how these things sort of affect us at different periods, and certainly they're stronger in those periods. But these things are always with us. There's always these, we only have eyes on the front of our head, really. And so we're fascinated by what we can see, and what we can't see, well, we don't even think about it. It's not even on our mind. But that does show up, you could say, as these sort of ghosts, in a sense, as these sort of smoky kind of figures that pass through our lives. Like Ketu is really interesting because I mentioned how he represents that white, clean, pure ash of the, like, this is Baba's Duni, you could say. No garbage ever goes into it. No, right? The Duni is that Babaji's fire pit where he does the rituals and the ceremonies out of it. And so it's just really clean. And so that's a Ketu is also that kind of a saint who's ash covered. He's sort of separated from everything. He's very white and sort of pure in a sense. But the disattachment is strong because Ketu is also an alien. And I just rectified someone's chart, and they know a bit of astrology. And I said, there's Ketu in the first house. You can see her face is very unusual. And he went, oh my God, she looks like an alien. He said this to his wife. So I don't know how that went over after I left. But she did in a way. She really kind of did. And that's Ketu. But Ketu is our own sense of alienation as well. Our own sense of, like, Ketu is that deep grief that goes beyond the Saturnian sadness. It's that really, like, deep sense of loss where you just feel annihilated. It's that, again, that alienation. You just can't connect with anything or anybody in society. You just feel very, very alone sometimes in Ketu. And well, that's sort of what they say is also the path to mysticism, or certainly they say it about shamanism, is that you go off in the forest by yourself for a long period of time and sort of stay out there and live and feel very separate and go out where you feel very, very alone in the world. And it's just you. Andrian.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It just, like, since you start talking about Rahu and Ketu, it made me think of this mystic character called Heyoka. And I don't know if you know of that character,
So,
but it's from the like some North American tribe, and it's basically a jester, and they're like painted black and white,
mm,
like stripes, and during the shaman like rituals, they're there to distract the shaman or the people from their spiritual like kind of like when they ingest
yeah,
substances, and they're made to do the exact opposite of what the person will be doing to kind of like try to disconnect them from what they're doing, and they're scary and they're trying to, and it's like a whole challenge, right? And they say that the person who goes like undergoes a spiritual like trip like that with the Hayoka and finishes it is like more spiritually like you did some work, right? And it made me
yeah.
think so much of Rahu and Ketu. I feel like it's, you know, the black and white and the role of it, and yeah.
Well, that's really what they are. Spiritually, they would say it's so it's like it's the Rahu's trying to get all of our attention. But from a spiritual perspective, we want to follow Ketu. Ketu is the silence. Ketu is the sort of karmic cleanup. And so spiritually, they would say, yeah, the one who's trying to get all of our attention, ignore him and focus on the one who's just quiet back there. Right. And so in a way, it's like when you see that, when you turn and see the quiet one, it's always sort of a reflection of the self as well, what we're seeing out there in the world. And so when you see the silence, when you sort of witness the silence, then you get this, you become the silence in a sense. Um, was it Nietzsche who stares into the abyss? Um, how is it? It's a two-part quote actually. Who stares into the abyss? But then it goes on about he who fights monsters becomes the monster they're fighting. So that's sort of this. They're really mirrors as well. I would think like Ketu is that really pure mirror. And so when you're staring into a Ketu sort of mirror, you're getting back this really the most pure reflection of yourself. And that's what all the letting go and the release and surrender and really that's what it does is you get the most pure reflection of yourself back from the universe. And if we think about Kundalini, I think I've mentioned this how like Ketu is those two poles at the end of the Kundalini. Rahu is all the vibration in the middle, and all the planets are the chakras sort of thing. But Ketu, they always say he rules over Muladhara. They say Ganesha, right? That's the myth of Ganesha sort of guarding his mother in the Kund and where she takes the bath. And so first we have to let Ganesha let us into sort of the Kundalini energies. In a sense, it's kind of an initiation, whether it's the self or you get that somewhere else, right? But so you have to get this, and that initiation is the surrender. The initiation is you can't fight Ganesha to let him in. You have to surrender to Ganesha and give him what he wants and sort of satisfy him. And in a way, that's what Tantra talks about ourselves as well. Like we can't repress our desires. We have to just feed them, give them what they want, make sure they're happy and sort of move on. But then we can transmute the energy so we don't have to give them, you could say, the material they like. We find a way to give them the energy that they like. And a lot of that comes through mantras and different practices that might come up at different times in their life. And so that's where a lot of the spiritual practices are kind of burning karmas or transmuting karmas. As astrologers, that's often how we sort of try to find to give advice to our clients as well. We find those energies that are kind of working for them, and we find ways that can highlight them, and the energies that aren't working for them, we find sort of mantras or we find practices where they can sort of voluntarily pay those karmas instead of being forced to pay them. Because, well, I think we'd all much rather voluntarily pay our karmas than be forced to. And this is kind of why we can't just run away from our families as well, right? Because then life is going to sort of force us to pay those karmas back, or those duties that we abandon. We just can't do that all the time. And so it's better to just stay and voluntarily pay it back than wait until the universe pays us back, because again, it's kind of like, well, that Durga and Kali, who are sort of, in a sense, the divine retribution. Um, Durga is kind of Rahu, Kali is Ketu. These are these really great forces of Mother Nature and the universe. And really, that's where I sort of realized that something like astrology works, because everything that exists is sort of like, this world of existing things is very mechanical in a sense. And the closer it gets to Earth, you could say element, the more mechanical it kind of is. And so you can, well, that's what scientists do. They sort of study the mechanics of the world, and then they can predict the future. That happened like that, then, well, in the future, something like this must happen. And so there is that sort of aspect to it. And in a way, that's what we're kind of also trying to do. Like, if you want a comfortable life, stay in, as a settler, sort of stay in one place, follow all those natural rhythms, all those sort of natural ceremonies and celebration that religion sort of teaches, are to help keep us in rhythm with the natural order of things, right? You have your harvest festival and the after harvest kind of thing, right? You have a really big party then. In the spring again, when things start growing, you have another really big festival and say, oh, wow, look, we got some money in the bank coming up. Let's party with what we have left from the year. And so you kind of enjoy those natural rhythms, and the calendar is sort of set up to do that. Of course, Rahu and Ketu are also the most unpredictable. Rahu, of course, is very irregular. You never really know what the court jesters are going to come up with. You never really know they're magic and miracles. Like, my God, anything can happen with the two of them. They don't have to follow the normal course of things. First this happens, then that happens, and then that happens. Okay, then that happens. They don't have to follow that. They can just be like, oh, by the way, there's this. Go ahead, Andrea.
And yeah, it just, when you were talking about like scientists, first there's this, and then obviously there must be that after, because they do the calculation. I was just gonna say, but I didn't. But that, yeah, like Rahu and Ketu is like, yeah, but what if this would happen that you would have had no idea it could ever happen? But like, and then it's like your theory now is just theory. It's not fact, like science is not necessarily facts, because there is the Rahu and Ketu bringing in that magical kind of like unpredictable possibilities to things.
All the time, it's like physicists, you see, are always sort of like pushing the bounds of what reality is, and now they've come to this sort of very theoretical string theory, because it sort of can't be proven. But they sort of seem to think, well, if you're looking for particles, you'll find particles. If you're looking for waves, you'll find waves. And you won't see the particles at all if you're looking for waves. And so there's this sort of factor, and actually Mark Dyczkowski, I don't know if I've given his name enough, but these sort of scientists are coming to him now, a Kashmiri Shaivite, a tantric sort of guy, to say, like, why like this? And he's like, well, if you're looking for Shiva everywhere, you'll find Shiva. If you're looking for Shakti everywhere, you'll find Shakti everywhere. and so that's kind of what this Rahu and Ketu, they're that dual reality, that split. And it's like, somehow two things can both be true, even though they're opposites. And in a way, that's sort of what we're working with as yogis, is trying to bring these two things together as much as possible. Or rather, as tantrics, you could say, we're trying to become aware of that thin film that always sort of exists between hot and cold. In the middle, there's sort of these thin gaps. And so that's the space between that we're always sort of looking for. And while Rahu and Ketu do everything they can to keep us from achieving that, it's like Andrian was talking about there, they distract us from our purpose. They distract us from what we're supposed to be doing in this life. And they sort of make these things that we have to do that, well, in a way, they keep us from completing the karmas that we that are really sort of our responsibility. They kind of hold us back, these ancient karmas. Yeah, go ahead, Emmett.
I guess I'm confused. You said that Rahu keeps us away from fulfilling our karmas?
The karmas of this sort of because he makes it's usually distracting things. We think, oh, this is what I'm meant to do, this is what I'm meant to do. And then you do it, and it's actually, you realize it's not fulfilling at all. And that's really the thing with Rahu. Like you want it so bad, and then you get it, and it's like there's no fulfillment there at all. It's not no nutrition for the system, you could say, Rahu.
So is it like Rahu is the obsessive part and Ketu is the part that you forget about, and the key is finding balance within that lesson to fix your karma, right?
Yeah, Ketu is kind of like that true spirituality in a sense that nobody's looking at because they're too focused on the things of this world, the objects, which is really what Rahu does. It separates us that way, where it's like, oh, wow, like you might think it's bringing you together, right? It attracts you someplace, but it's usually this sort of objectification that's attracting you because you want it to fulfill you. You want it to sort of, like, Rahu is his head. He's always eating. He can't get enough. All the addictions are usually connected with Rahu, right? This kind of stuff. And so he never gets any fulfillment from anything. He never gets any nutrition from it. Whereas Ketu is the one he sort of gives. He lets go. And actually, it's because he's already full. Ketu doesn't want anything. And so in a sense, that's when we're able to sort of go karmically neutral or extinguish old karmas without making new ones. Is when we're able to just sort of let go of them. When we're just free of them. Now, Rahu and Ketu also get turned on their head because, well, they also say Ketu is the emptiness. But Ketu doesn't want anything. He has no desire for anything. And so he is kind of, well, he's full when he's empty, in a sense. Right? He's already fulfilled. So there's none of that want, none of that desire that comes with it. And so what they're doing is they're sort of distracting us. Our deeper purposes are going to be connected to, well, the sun is one of the most spiritual planets. That's our really the light and our soul. And then Jupiter is also kind of our dharma. And then for the artists, they're kind of Venus. And these are sort of, we'll get much more fulfilled through following these planets than we will through Rahu and Ketu, I guess. Ketu will, anyways, you're good. You don't want anything. And I think there's probably much more sort of a lot of our freedom lies in sort of the core 5 planets as well. Whereas like sun and moon are quite powerful and connected. That's that side of us. It's like, well, one part of your life, you're like, God, I'm just like my mother. And another part of your life, you're God, I'm just like my father. And so that's sort of those ancestral, and there's a bit of freedom in there. But I think a lot of our freedom can get expressed really through like Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury. These sort of 5 core planets, because Rahu and Ketu also, there's no freedom in that. Like Rahu is just this magnet. We're going to it. We don't know why. And then we get there, we make a bunch of karma, a bunch of stuff we have to deal with and pay back afterwards. Some kind of karmic debts come. And Ketu is, again, it's usually not our choice that we're done with those karmas. Ketu, sort of the universe sort of decides, okay, you're done with those karmas, and we're left going like, no, I wasn't. I wasn't done with those karmas at all. Give those karmas back to me, please. And so that's where we suffer. That's where that really deep sort of grief can come in, that sense of like, my whole world has been annihilated. I've lost everything I've ever had. These sort of senses of really deep grief. But those periods of loss, those periods of Ketu, that's when Ganesha will open the door to the Kundalini. That's when you enter into sort of the more the energetic reality, the sort of deeper ultimate reality that we're kind of anyways trying to talk about in this class. Very hard to talk about. But you enter into this sort of realm, this world where you start to see things a bit differently. Right? And that really comes after you just give up, you totally surrender. There's a funny little story about Kundalini. I really like this one. Mark told it years ago, and it's kind of the fun version, I guess. And so once that door sort of opens and you enter the Devi's Kund, right? And you go in there and first thing you do is you go and you have a bath. They say there's nobody there, it's empty. You just have the swimming pool to yourself. And so you go in and you take a bath, and so then you purify yourself more. You get that sort of purification, and then okay, there's the path, and you set out on the path, and you set out on that path alone. There's nobody there, there's no Devi yet. And you start walking, but along the path, then they say, you find the Devi, you find Shakti. She's kind of lying in the ditch drunk or something like that, right? And so you pick the Devi out of the ditch and you kind of brush her off, and then you take her back to the Kund again. So you walk with Devi and you go to the Kund and you let her also take a bath because she was just drunk in the ditch somewhere, right? So you want to take care of her, and so you both take a bath and you're both pure again, you're both clean and fresh. And so then you set off together with the Devi up the road of the Kundalini. And by the time you get to the heart, you have some experience together, and that's where you become one with the Devi. That's where that sort of union of body and spirit sort of take place in the heart. And so then once you become one with that Devi, then you continue up the path as one until you get up to the third eye and the Sahasrara, where you have the big party. You have the big celebration happens up there. And so that's that sort of supreme bliss that gets felt. So this was kind of anyways, one of these old Kaula texts, I don't know what it was a story I heard, told this story about Kundalini. But first was getting in there, and really Ketu is, again, that pure white ash. It's us going back to that most pure moment where we're fully clean, where we're fully empty of karma, where we're fresh. And for a lot of people, this is the first part of their spiritual experience, right? They leave the West and they go to India for their first time, and they go and spend some time at an ashram, and they really, really like it. And so they spend a bunch more time at an ashram. They change their visa to 6 months and go crazy. And by the time they get out of that, they're very sort of clean. Like a lot of that early path is the deprogramming, sort of just getting a lot of those samskaras out of the head, those looping in the thoughts, those things where you can't really see anything other than your own mind. And so the first, we get away from ourselves, in a sense. We get away from our own mind. We get away from everything that sort of makes us who we are. Just get away from it. That's really what meditation is. You just close your eyes and shut off the senses, and you just get away from it all. And so that's really a big part. And so Ketu is that blank slate, that tabla rasa of philosophy, where the world now can just write all over me. And so this is where we see a lot of people run into problems, because once they get sort of purified of their old self and they're kind of like, well, I'm nobody, I'm nothing. There comes a point when, well, either you become a really good sadhu and you remain nothing, which I don't advise because it's going to be a hard life, but hey, if that's where you go, that's where you go. It's probably a really good thing. But otherwise, you have to start to build yourself back. You have to start to kind of find who you are beneath that blank slate. Otherwise, you stay in that Rahu Ketu where you're just kind of a lost person. You don't belong anywhere. And so you purify yourself, but then you find who you are in this life. You find your sun ego instead of your Rahu ego. You find your sort of moon culture rather than your Ketu culture. You find that thing that binds you and holds you together. You find your sort of ground again. Otherwise, you stay in this sort of like Rahu and Ketu are both very lost places to be, very ungrounded, very unreal. And well, really nice if you're a big Guru Baba or on the Ketu side, or if you're, well, geez, you see some really great personalities on the Rahu side, but they're, God, it's tough, man. You get up over Rahu's 18 years by astrology or something like that, and they're drowning for 18 years before they come back to ground again. And so these are tough periods. And so that Rahu really is like, pray to God and hold on. Right? That's really all we can do with that energy. And sometimes that's the only advice we can give to clients as well. Like, Rahu is sort of like, you made that bed, now lie in it, sort of thing. And it's going to be a rough ride, but that's where your karma is now. Like, oh, you can only go with it. And you can't change that. But you can pray to God. You can try to connect to those sort of deeper forces that are guiding you. And God help us, we learn our lessons from Rahu and Ketu, from those sort of hard consequences and really the consequences just being bound, just not being free. And so a lot of what our freedom is when we can really express ourselves and who we are. And sun, for example, whenever we're expressing ourselves through that, is this really pure, original sense of self. And on a spiritual level, that's who you are. That's what your soul is, that light that you shine, that originality you project is really that's the light of your soul sort of shining out. And so we all have that light somehow. Rahu and Ketu are those shadows. That's who you think you are. That thing is what you think it is. But as far from reality as you can get on one sense, even though on another sense, they try to show us reality, the sort of ultimate reality, the reality beyond this sort of this reality that underlies everything. And so they're really sort of amazing planets that way. There's a sense of, so I mentioned how Ketu is like a saint and he's kind of a homeless man, or he's a refugee, or he doesn't belong anywhere. He has no boundaries, no, in a sense, moon is our boundaries. And so Ketu is without a nation, without a culture, without a family, without a home. All these sorts of things come in to Ketu. But Ketu then is also the freest of them all. And so it's funny, like refugees, it's like they're in really rough shape, but in a sense, they're much more free than anybody else. They can kind of go anywhere and sort of claim their statuses anywhere, even though they often feel very bound because they're sort of, I think this also happens in the Ketu phase. You're in the Ketu and what you're looking out is you're seeing the Rahu, or you're in the Rahu and you're seeing the emptiness or that kind of thing. You're seeing the other. And that's how we are a lot of times, just seeing the other. And we don't really take that time to see the self. Just anyways, get away and sort of be alone and witness that. Now,
groceries over there.
sorry, I just yeah.
Hey, there's free food over there.
Oh, okay. Now he's telling me there's I think someone's feeding the homeless behind me. He's telling me there's food over there, something, something, something. So that's no, it's one of the sweet things I find of traveling sometimes and staying in these sort of hostels and these poorer neighborhoods as well is I'm actually very well treated usually by homeless people, like things like that. Like they come and they tell me, oh, there's food over there, you can get this there, you can, sometimes sitting in the park, they're like, hey man, you want a beer? You want this? You want that? Anyway, so that's my sort of Rahu and Ketu, to a sense. I sort of get in with a lot of the Rahu and Ketu characters. And I've read a lot of charts for them as well. It's really quite, I make usually very nice connection with the outcasts of society, you could say. And it's funny because I don't consider myself an outcast in a lot of ways. I'm sort of a traveler, but I get along quite well with them. And part of that, I think, has to do with Ketu. As I'll talk a little astrology for a minute. So Ketu, things don't stick with Ketu. He's sort of like, we just don't hold on to the things Ketu brings into our life. And that's like, there's no connection. Well, it doesn't stick in your life. It just sort of passes through like a ghost. And so things don't really stick in Ketu period. And so astrologically, I have Ketu in a 6th house. And so it's things like imbalances and the imbalances of society and these sorts of things. 6th house is also our debts. And so I think I do a lot of these astrology readings for kind of homeless people. Oh, I can't. I'm deaf and I have earphones in, brother. I really can't hear anything. Oh, okay. Oh, perfect. Oh, yeah. Perfect, brother. Thank you. So, the same message, but he had really handfuls of food and groceries and everything. There's a bounty going on behind me. So
Are you sure you're not missing out on something, Mike?
I'm pretty sure I am missing out on something, actually. Yeah. But
You want to take like 10 minutes break?
no, that's fine. I'll be good. I'll be okay. Yeah. Anyways, Rahu and Ketu figures can also be quite nice. They're not always it's often that shadow we see as well. It's like, for me a little bit, I'm coming to the USA for the first time and down in these places like Memphis and Texas, and all I know these places from is basically from the news. And so I don't have a good picture of any place in the USA. It just sounds like a crazy place from what the news tells me. But now I'm here and it's like, oh, actually it's pretty chill. Not nearly what the news is. And so I suffer with that as well. My mother watches the news about India and sends me messages when I'm there going like, oh my God, are you okay? And it's like, India is nothing like what the news tells people it is. And so that's that sort of Rahu and Ketu. There's clouds in our mind where we don't know. We just know what we see. We just know the illusion before us. And it takes some of the other planets to sort of see beneath the illusion, to see behind it. And sort of how Ketu is kind of funny because it's that phobia. It's sort of that we see our own kind of reptilian brain through the phobias, through those things that get clouded. We see this sort of, we see these sides of us that we'd rather keep in the shadows, that we'd rather keep hidden, in a sense. This Rahu and the Ketu, there's always some confusion, especially with the Rahu. There's always some, you just don't know. You're just, hey, maybe you're just speechless like that. So now how does this work exactly? So I'm no professional on electromagnetism or anything like that. Far from it. But so I was doing this little study about electromagnetism, and so they kind of work together and they're all the sort of same thing. And I was really looking at that and trying to figure it out in regards to astrology and these energies and these kind of things. As far as I can tell, and this might even apply to something like the string theory, where you've got waves or you've got particles, and they're these two sort of different axes. And I think one is kind of the sun, this polarity that we have between the sun and the moon, which is maybe the electric polarity of positive and negative. But I think Rahu and Ketu within that are sort of the shadow of that energy, which is the magnetism. Rahu being that magnetic force sort of drawing us together, drawing us in, which seems like a kind of unity, but it's not really. And Ketu is that repulsion, that magnetic force that's sort of pushing everything away, or seeming to. But again, it's like, I think there's sort of this sense of the reverse is sort of actually true. Like Ketu is pushing everything away, but in ways pushing everything to sort of bunch up together. Whereas Rahu is drawing you towards him, but he's sort of drawing you away from everything. And so that's where that distraction comes in. That's where it's sort of these karmas that are from past lives, in a sense, that are afflicting us. It's not the karmas of this life, Rahu and Ketu, in a sense. Of course, when Ketu does his cleanup job in our lives, he'll certainly eradicate a lot of the karmas we have in this life. But they're not necessarily about that. They're sort of these much deeper energies. These really deep ancestral karmas of a whole history of our past lives, in a sense, that whole history of our future. And that's really what a lot of that, like, be aware of that space between. That's really what it is. It's being aware of the present, that space between the past and the future, that fleeting moment that somehow we're trying to catch hold of and sort of, oh, that's reality. Right, it looked like the sun kept sort of flashing every time I moved my head. So that's sort of this energy, this Rahu and Ketu, they're this, I don't know, they're a more primal polarity than even the sun and the moon. It's like masculine and feminine, in a sense, almost don't really fully exist even in the Rahu Ketu. It's that very primal energy, but there's sort of this two axes of reality going on in our lives. There's this sort of sun and moon axis, which is really just focused on this individual soul and this sort of life we live in now, this bound, kind of karmically bound space that is our life. Whereas Rahu and Ketu are really these more like this karmically bound space of maybe being a human, right? And so it's sort of beyond some of these sort of dualities that we see here. Maybe even more, not even just being a human, being a part of this material existence, you could say. It's that original duality of sort of like the subject and the object split. And so there's a certain karma that comes with just being a part of matter. And that's really that most basic sort of mechanical karma in a lot of ways. Is there any questions about Rahu and Ketu? Any sort of things that you've heard about them that you wanted me to talk about?
So I have a general question. So these are the properties of these individual planets, right? Like, but how they are placed in the chart will determine what aspect of life a person would have, say, detachment to, or a desire or attraction towards.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, I'm I'm the person who knows least about astrology here, so I know that's very basic question probably.
Yeah, no, it's very basic. And the thing is, we don't need an astrology chart to come to these things. We can sort of, just by talking to the people, they'll tell us, like, I feel alienated from my family. I feel alienated from my friends. I feel alienated from my partner, from my, I feel alienated from my coworkers. So they'll, like, everybody knows their own astrology chart when the time comes. They say, God, people say the exact words, like the most basic stuff in astrology, and I hear it straight from people's mouths, and I just laugh sometimes. They're like, and so, yeah, it's not always about the astrology chart. It's just sort of trying to bear witness of that in our own lives. When we feel that alienation, where is that? We can sort of come to a deeper understanding of our own experience, say. So go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, there's like two little things. The first one that it's kind of hard because, like, for example, I know that my Ketu is in the 6th house also, and it's like, oh, I can't even, it's so confusing that I can't even tell like what's my alienation. Like, I feel like I can like kind of like, you know what I mean? So there's like that confusion around like also knowing what it means really. And then my other thing was, could you tell the tale of Rahu and Ketu, the brothers? Because I remember you told it one time, but like how like,
Yeah, how they came to be.
yeah.
Yeah, well, this was at the end of the churning of the ocean of milk. And so they churn the ocean, and the Amrita, the nectar of immortality, finally comes out. So what they were all greedy for, and they were all very greedy for it. And so this comes up, and well, the gods always look a little bit bad, actually, in just about all the stories. The gods are being the treacherous ones, and the demons, actually, they're just like, hey, they just want to enjoy life, man. And and so the gods sort of set this up as just laughing, all the homeless people telling me where to get food, right? Just want everybody to enjoy life, man. And so the gods had it all set up. They were going to trick the demons.
Mike, I have to go. Sorry, I have something set up, and I will look forward for the recording.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. So the gods were going to trick them, and the plan was they were going to, like, Vishnu sent in Mohini, which is like the most beautiful, ravishing girl, sort of this dancing girl sort of figure, to distract everyone. Well, the gods all lined up first, and the demons were in the back. And so the plan was the gods would drink all the Amrita, and there'd be none left by the time it got to the demons. And Shwarbanu was the name of this demon, and he saw this all unfolding. This is Rahu and Ketu as one being, sort of thing. And so you could say he was really a master magician, a master, like, can you imagine these two as one being instead of separated? So he could see through everything. And so then anyway, so he got the Amrita, and so he just started to drink it. And I can't remember exactly how this worked out, but somehow the sun and the moon are the ones who sort of saw this happening and said, hey, Vishnu, hey, look at this guy. The demon's drinking our nectar of immortality. And so then Vishnu threw the disc and chopped off the head. And so he threw it's a chakra disc, actually, that he threw. So he threw this chakra disc and he chopped off the head, but it was too late. The nectar had got down there. And so they're like, well, what are we going to do with you now? You're also immortal. And so they put them up in the sky and give them places, planets. And so, well, they're not really planets, right? They're just these sort of mathematical points, but we see the effect of them. It's like you see the effect of your phobia on your life. And you're like, I'm just a crazy person. I don't know why like this, but it's affecting my life. So that's kind of how the Rahu and Ketu work. So this is also that separation. An interesting thing about Ketu, we think astrologically, is Ketu removes any boundaries. And so it's like, we talk about like Ketu in the sixth house you mentioned, Andrea, and I have the same. And so we don't kind of, well, we have karmic debts, you could say, to people who are unattached to anything. We have karmic debts to these Ketu people. We have some selfless service we have to perform to the, to the saints and the refugees and the homeless people and all this sort of thing. And they're not going to appreciate it, or maybe they will, but doesn't matter. We just have to give to these Ketu, basically just throw energy down a black hole in a lot of cases. And that's what Ketu is, a black hole. And so anyways, it's not pleasant, but just throw that energy away and I'll throw some more away after that. But we also, so we also have no sort of boundaries with these sort of characters as well. And no boundaries with debts. And if that Ketu is on, like, say, Moon, for example, no emotional boundaries. And so these are sort of the empaths who are sort of feeling and absorbing from everywhere. Ketu with the sun is kind of like, we have no boundaries on the way we'll express ourselves. So you might be a very sort of normal person, but you kind of express yourself in a strange way. There's no boundaries to which you can say. So it can be very, very creative or very, very annoying in a sense, go either way. Rahu and Ketus can always go either way. They can be really, really good or really, really like just annoying and making hell for everyone. They're demons after all, right? I think the little gremlins running around, like, they just caused havoc everywhere. Even if they meant no harm, right? They still cause havoc. So this kind of energy that's like Ketu and Venus, they have no boundaries to relationships. Ketu and Jupiter, they have no boundaries with father figures, with knowledge, with wisdom. Ketu Mercury, they say this is a boon for astrologers because there's sort of no boundaries in their calculations and no boundaries. They can sort of read other people's thoughts, right? And so like Ketu Jupiter, they might be connected to some wisdom of like, I could say past life wisdom, but maybe it's more of like this deep collective consciousness of generational wisdom. And so Jupiter Ketu people would be sort of connected to all of that. There'd be no boundaries to any of that. And so it sort of removes these boundaries between us and the people as well. Ketu Venus, no boundaries with women. Ketu Mars, no boundaries with men. Ketu Jupiter, no boundaries with father figures, or Moon, mother figures, right? It removes a lot of these boundaries. And so it can, the same energy can bring us very close or keep us very far away at the same time. It's like, well, there's no boundaries, so the two can become one, but there's no connection. And so, well, if it's not connected, you're as far away still as you can possibly be. And so it's very sort of interesting. It can make a person sort of emotionally numb or emotionally scattered. And like I said, give that sort of deep, deep sense of loss and grief that comes with it. And so it's very, well, Ketu is the ultimate purifier. It's like we can add heat to something to purify something, or you can add Ketu energy, which just annihilates everything, right? It's like radiating your, I don't know, your barber shears rather than just dipping them in a little bit of liquid of solvent or whatever they do. And so that's what Ketu does. And so, like, I did a little bit of hospice work for a while, and you're dealing with people experiencing a lot of grief, mostly at the loss. Like these old ladies, they spend 40, 50, 60 years with their partner, and then their partner dies. Not old ladies, but old people, older, these older couples, and one dies, and that sense of grief, that sense of loss, just, it's like their whole life almost becomes a black hole in a sense. They're not able to connect with anything. Everything just seems very pointless, meaningless. This is sort of danger of Ketu as well. You could say the danger of sort of tantric and spiritual practices in a sense, because there's often that stage where you get to where it is that sort of Buddhist nothingness. It is that sort of sense of emptiness. But you have to be very sort of strong to withstand that sense of emptiness. Otherwise, you feel lost, you feel grief. And so you keep going through that sense of emptiness and you start to see the sort of fullness that it is. It's like when you take a carbonated beverage, you pour a warm carbonated beverage and you pour it over some ice. And all this foam sort of bubbles up at first, and it seems like it's just empty, it's just air. But then it comes to this stasis point, right? You'll see the liquid rise and the foam kind of come back down. And so we need to come back to that sort of stasis point after the period of emptiness. Usually it's like a great period of release. And so we have to come back again, back to this sort of this ground, this middle point again of who we are, of well, it's not emptiness, it's not fullness, or emptiness and fullness are both true at the same time. Right? Joy and sadness are both true at the same time. And so we start to see these different layers of ourselves, in a sense. And eventually we want to connect to that deepest layer that they tell us is sort of freedom and bliss. But even in that state, you can still be experiencing sadness, you can still be experiencing pain, you can still be experiencing suffering. But it's that sense of who you are when you get it quite deeply, you're sort of not moved by that emptiness. You're still sort of the center of the emptiness. It's interesting, actually. Think of the center of the emptiness. This brings us to things like, oh, this is a great declaration. I think it's from the Bible, but I know it, of course, from Nietzsche. Ecce homo. I'm going to pronounce, I have no training in Latin. I don't know anything about it. My pronunciation is going to be terrible, but ecce homo, behold man. And in a way, that's sort of how we find meaning. When we realize the self and we're ready to say, like, behold man, what we're doing is we sort of declaring a new center of the universe. Sort of happens when we're born and we start screaming and crying. A new center of the universe is declared each time. And so we sort of, it's a mathematical thing, actually. They talk about like it's in space. It's even when we're doing our astrology, if you look into it, so many people have declared different centers of the universe. And of course, that sets the chart up for a whole different perspective and brings a whole lot of confusion. And then I try to just use the one that works, and if it works, well, then use that one. But really, it's like what we are. We're a declared center of the universe. Behold man, I am. Where, well, this is what the church and the scientists are always sort of arguing about, because even anyways, a big argument in individuality. It's like, does the whole universe just, revolve around you? Well, it does kind of. You are the center of your universe. We're all the center of our own universe. And so does the whole universe revolve around the sun? Well, it does that also. But again, it's this idea of both can be true. There's these sort of two polarities, these two opposites, that it's not one or the other. It's like both can be true. I think I've talked about that even in political realms. It's like communism or capitalism. It's like, well, both have their place. And so both truths sort of have their place as well. So this is like, well, they talk about this a lot sort of in spiritual circles. Once you start deep diving into spirituality, it's like all the basic rules of life sort of get flipped upside down. He was sitting up here listening for a little while. And so these basic rules of truth seem to get flipped upside down. it's almost like you have, well, it's almost like you have universal ideals, universal truths, things that are like generally known, general knowledge in a sense. But then you have these particular situations where you have to throw all that general knowledge out the window in a sense and focus on like what you have before you. It's like if we think of the polarities, like even the masculine and feminine type polarities, it's like, well, Venus is the archetypical feminine. And so, well, what is that? Well, it's being pleasing, it's being pretty, it's being peaceful and nice, right? And it's all these sort of things that well, women argue with you and you say, well, a woman can also be a warrior. And well, certainly in particular instances on the when you're looking at an actual woman, well, that she can be anything. But that universal sort of expression of femininity, of womanhood is sort of, well, Venus or Moon, you could say either of those. And they're very passive, they're very gentle, they're very much about like reflecting the energy that comes at them. And so in a way, it's like you can get both of these truths. You can get, well, femininity is very peaceful and passive and pretty. But then in reality, in an individual case, you can get a woman who's still very feminine, masculine, and all the rest of these. And so we're often working in these situations where, well, two things are equally true. You could say even in cases of human rights, this is really the crux of human rights, is that both people are usually right. Both people have some kind of a right. Problem is those two rights are sort of crossing over on each other. And now we have to sort of decide over, well, how do you decide something like that when two people are right? And so I think what a lot of human rights tribunals, the point of them should be, is to keep the conversation at least going. Not so much as to really decide over who is more right than the other. Keep that conversation going until it can sort of resolve itself. But well, as we see by war, that doesn't happen. Nobody wants to talk. They want some action. They want to say, no, my rights are more right than yours, and so give me that piece of the pie. And so that's also, well, that's Rahu Ketu. That's the illusion that we can get what we want through that kind of division. Right? Like my mother always said, fighting for peace is like fucking for chastity. Right? And so we always think we can sort of, we think we can do that. We think like we can fight and get peace that way. Right? We can just settle this with force. But actually it is other planets like the Venus who really brings peace, wants to keep that dialogue going, wants to keep some kind of trade happening. That's really what like global trade was all about. It was really about, like, it was a very peaceful, I don't know, what did we have, about 20 years of it, where everybody seemed to be more or less getting along. And you see at the same time that everybody's sort of closing up their borders, we're seeing more division, and everybody's now, we're kind of going to war with each other. And all the countries are saying, oh, well, we have to be self-sufficient in all our resources because, well, next year I want to bomb those people I'm getting resources from. Right? And so it's a sort of clouded judgment. And very often it's just you do one little thing and you get in over your head very quickly. And that's sort of that energy of Rahu. But Rahu is also like, again, he seems to be this magnetic force bringing things together, but nothing ever stays together for long. Or if it does, it's because you feel bound, you feel stuck to be in that. So Rahu's kind of that mud. That's the mud, the pollution, the thing you're not expecting from even the good intention, you could say. And that's sort of how this Rahu works. And so you think you can make good karma for yourself, but then you find, well, now you're stuck with karma. You're stuck with some other debt that's not allowing you to be free, that's not allowing you to sort of express yourself and realize yourself. And really, it's kind of, Well, here's one of the biggest confusions of all time. So you get the very rational thinkers. They're like, they're only science and only what I can see is real. And all this other mysticism, mumbo jumbo, forget about that. And 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 anyways, and my free will is sort of everything. Like, forget about God. We make our own reality, we make our own life, and forget about all that other stuff. And well, the funny thing about that is if you really look at that as a philosophical possibility, well, then they're completely bound in karma and there's absolutely no free will, because again, that's sort of that mechanical, that's, if they're scientists, a scientist is sort of reading the mechanical universe. And so we're just a bundle of nerves and hormones that sort of push us along our destiny, and sort of one thing happens because the other and the other and the other, and there's absolutely no freedom, you could say, in the scientific, the materialistic point of view. And even in the point of view of like my free will, this is almost like one of the most bound areas you can get into. The true freedom is in this sort of this spiritual freedom that's beyond all of this. That's sort of realizing yourself as being beyond all of this, because the more you connect to that, well, the more you sort of realize I'm not just this mechanical being who's bound by karma to do this thing and the other thing and the other thing. You able to not connect to free will, but you're able to connect to your inner sense of freedom, where it's not about free will. You've surrendered to all that mechanical stuff, you could say. And this is where the yogis, a lot of them will say, like, well, give up everything you have in order to get back the whole universe. And so that's this kind of thing. We just surrender everything you have, even your free will. And what you get back from that is a freedom that's so much deeper, so much more meaningful, so much more fulfilling. But that sense of self you have to give up, that sense of freedom, that sense of who you are. You have to give all of that up in order to get back the whole universe. So that's the great sort of fear of spirituality is, God, I gotta lose myself. But again, two things are true at the same time. At the same time, you have to be firmly seated in the self. Emmett, you had something?
Yeah. Well, by the way, I'm loving this class and everything you're sharing. But yeah, so as much as we want to spiritually ascend, or as much as we want to hit that spirituality of freedom, Rahu is also kind of there to remind us that we're a human body with desires, and that we do need to satisfy those desires at least somewhat in order to not fully be free and just become this this space angel spiritual kind of thing, which is what Ketu wants us to become, right?
Well, a lot of times those desires aren't going to go away until you realize the emptiness in them. And so to some degree, they often do have to be satisfied. And that's kind of why they say, like, oh, it's a Rahu period. Just hold on and hold on tight and pray to God, right? Kind of thing. And so you just like, again, we don't want to just like gratuitously be just like chasing after every desire. We want to have some sense of control. And so we'll find that by sort of trying to connect with higher spirit, you could say. And so hopefully there's some sort of like, we realize the higher purpose or the deeper meaning, and that somehow we can learn from it. But a lot of it is, yeah, just hold on and go for the ride. And once you realize the emptiness of those desires, then you can let go of them. Andrean, you have something?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you keep saying that, like, you know, you're like, when you're in emptiness, when you're in a Ketu period, you have to kind of find yourself again, or find where to go from that emptiness. But like, how do you do that? Like, it's easy to say, but like, how, you know, right? Like, what's
Well,
how can you find yourself in emptiness?
it's interesting. I think it has a lot to do with the next phase after Ketu periods astrologically. You go from Ketu to a Venus period. And so in a way, Venus is that, well, we talked about Venus before. It's like connecting to all your senses, and you become very, very present in the moment, and you learn to appreciate that, and you give the gratitude to it, and you sort of allow the world to fill you up again, in a sense, which is why things like Sangha, our environment that we put ourselves in, becomes very, very important. And so we sort of allow it to, we allow the beauty, we allow that Venusian quality of peace to start to fill us up. And after Venus, once we sort of get that, then we have a sun period, which is, I think that's one of the strongest periods of self-expression and kind of purity. Sun can also, well, he'll also chip away some of the impurity. He's not as cutting as Ketu, but Sun is maybe like, he's kind of, they say, cruel. And so he also strips away some of the impurities. But that's really finding the self. And so I think there's that, again, you go through Ketu, you go through Venus, you sort of allow, again, you allow appreciation and the beauty of this existence to fill you up. The arts, the crafts, the aesthetics, the finer sort of things. But go ahead, Emmett.
I literally finished a K2 period yesterday, and I'm starting the Venus one today.
Yeah.
And I guess what it felt like was like it was, and this is the third level of dashas or whatever. But like it was just all confusing, the whole K2 period. I let everything go, and a lot of things came my way at the same time. And I guess I'm trying to and yeah, there's definitely a lot more appreciation and being in my body showed up last night, like right at the end of the K2 period, coming into that Venusian. So that's accurate. I guess what I'm kind of not necessarily confused about, but unsure of is like a Rahu period is you kind of take your hands off the wheel and let it go. Well, I felt that the K2, oh, you hold on.
Yeah, hold on, and Rahu.
So
Yeah.
so because like in my K2 period, I just let everything go and said screw everything. Well, in Rahu, it's I'm doing everything.
It kind of is. It's that sense of you're doing everything, or it's a sense that like, it's like because of past karmas, all of a sudden you're caught in this sort of chain of events. You're caught up in these karmas that you don't know how to get out of, really. You took like a bit of a wrong turn somewhere, and now you're going down this alley, and it's like all you can do is like keep going down that for now. And so it's kind of like just hold on and enjoy the ride, because it's gonna blow your mind.
So in a way, Rahu is kind of like a full moon that happens every month, where it's kind of like the peak of everything you've done so far up until that period.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's this, again, you're just making karma, or you're certainly not really burning any karma in the Rahu period. You're just out of your league. You're beyond yourself somehow. Whereas the Ketu is like you're kind of headless, you're disconnected. Somehow in a Rahu period, you're going to be invested in that somehow. Probably ego invested, maybe. But again, it's that dark ego that gets invested with Rahu. It's that who you think you are rather than who you actually are. So they're tricky because it's again, it's like us tantrics. We worship that Maya Devi. We worship this world that is before us, this illusion that's in our being projected from our own minds. And through worshiping that, we hope to be able to sort of see into its essence, see into its core. It's like Ketu. It's like, how do you appease Ketu? How do you appease Ganesha? How do you appease the gods? Well, you give them what you think they want. Right. And then as you work with them for life, you find more and more what they kind of want, in a sense. And so it's the same way with us, with each of these planets. We sort of naturally begin to discover, what does our Rahu want? What is our, and so we start to more naturally go that way. Anyways, it's funny, I just started, basically when I got to the USA, I started a Rahu period, and it's going to go until the middle of July, which is about when I expect to get back to Canada. Or even in Canada, but so this Rahu is sort of like, it's not in my control really where I'm going. I kind of, where's the bus and where's the hostel that kind of works for me there? I'll go that far now, and next time I go this far. And so I'm just kind of following where fate is bringing me. And so we don't have a lot of free will in the Rahu Ketu periods. The free will, while Sun is a very free will time, Mars can be too. Certainly the most free will planets. But it goes down fairly quickly after that. So, and that's sort of like, in a way, what Tantra works on. None of you have probably ever heard of this book. It was a really great book. Someone gave it to me when I was about 12 years old or something like this, maybe even younger. And out of any tantric sort of manuals or things like this that I've ever seen, this is probably the best one. And it was very famous in probably the 70s, I think. It was a really famous book. It was called The Sensuous Man by M. And used to see it all in North America, used to see it in garage sales all the time. And so this book, really what it did was it taught us how to connect more with each of our senses. It's really all it did. And so Venus is the guru of the demons, and Rahu is the biggest demon. So Venus is that guru. And so the more we sort of connect to our senses, the more we become aware. I am seeing, and what are you seeing? And I'm hearing, and what are you hearing? And all of these sorts of things. The more sort of sensitive we become to, well, when there's noise in the system, which is kind of what Rahu and Ketu are, a bit of noise in the system. But it's also, again, that ability to connect with the senses teaches us how to control them, teaches us what our senses like and what our senses don't like, and these kinds of things. And so learning to control the senses is also learning to kind of train the guru of the demons. And so you get a smoother, you could say a smoother connection with Rahu and Ketu by going that route. I'm looking for water that I don't have with me today. I knew when I sat down, I was like, should I go back up and get the water? But no, I'm stuck now.
You can go get water, Mike.
No, I'll be fine. We've only got about a half hour left, and it's like, it's way up in that building there somewhere. Around corners and 3 passcodes to push into doors, and oh God, it's a whole security apparatus going on here. So it's this is one of the most sleepy cities I've ever been in. I can't believe how it's quieter than Saskatoon, I think. For any of the Canadians out there, it's a small town Canada. Pretty sleepy place. So, well, this is something else with Rahu and Ketu. So even when we look like energetically in the first class, the first part, I sent something about stages of consciousness or states of consciousness, being connected with states of sleep, being connected with like sleeping, dreaming, deep sleep, these sorts of things. And it's funny because there's a sort of reversal that comes in them as well, spiritually speaking, compared to material speaking. But one of the metaphors, you could say, even of Rahu and Ketu, and one of the metaphors of sort of like not being connected spiritually is being asleep. And I think this connects with even modern political movements, because I think a lot of this tantra gets misconfused and is actually being incorporated in modern political movements. But part of that is the woke movement. And I only ever knew this word as a slur, but I guess for a long time people were using it as like a pat on the back kind of thing, like you're very woke, and it was like really good thing. But this was also sort of their way of sort of saying, like, I'm awake. I can see the reality. I see what's really happening in this world. Whereas deep sleep is sort of that state of Rahu and Ketu, where you're sleeping to the deeper realities. We're only usually sort of seeing the surface, which is actually what our mind paints on things. And so we want to try to see beyond what our mind is painting on this reality and see something for what it is. Instead of like, because our mind paints an object in front of us. And that's all. So that's all we really see with Rahu and Ketu is these objects, which is really funny because they're the most disconnected from the objects. They're the most sort of, oh, they're not even real, man. But they sort of make us connect and make us see the world in this very objective way. Which again, when you're only seeing the objective thing, you don't connect to its essence. You don't connect to its core. And so as yogis, as energy workers, we're always trying to see certainly beyond that object of a person and connect what's inside, and always sort of seeing deeper and deeper inside the other. And of course, we can only see as deeply inside another as we go inside of ourselves. And so that means we all have a lot of work to do, right? To really recognize the self and sort of see those, well, those shadow sides is really Rahu and Ketu and Saturn and all these very strong karmas are really these shadow sides of ourselves and the dark corners of ourselves that we want to sort of see and reveal and then become acquainted with. Rahu and Ketu, the demon, it's sort of that beast, that monster that we all have inside of ourselves. It just wants to eat and eat and eat and try and satisfy all its desires. There's on the end, just eat and eat and eating. Look at that Rahu head just shoveling food back. I hope it's satisfying. Very good, nutritious food for you. Otherwise, it's just, again, even food. Rahu in the second house is like dry, dead, unnutritious foods. And so Rahu can eat and they always want things and they become, Rahu in the second becomes very materialistic because they're never getting any nutrition. And so they eat something, but they're still hungry because their body's like, well, give me some vitamins. And so you just eat something and the body's like, no, I said I wanted vitamins. I'm still hungry here. And so we try to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and we just can't get, there's no nutrition in it. There's no satisfaction to the body, to the mind, to the soul. It's just emptiness. It's like Rahu in the 8th house of a chart. The 8th house is sex and things like this. People are fascinated by sex and death and the wheels of transformation. And so early on, they get into these sort of sexual escapades that are a little over their head, a little more than they sort of bargained for, because they're sort of drawn like a magnet into these 8th house, these sort of dark and scary places where, geez, you can be killed, man, in the 8th house. And so Rahu 8, you sort of see a lot of problems with that. Rahu in 10th and 11th houses, they say it's very good because it's like you want recognition in the 10th house. And so you achieve very high place in your career, but you're never satisfied. It's never enough. And so eventually you're just like, it just falls away from you because you thought you were attached. You thought it was your purpose. You thought it was your destiny. But you get it and you achieve so far and you realize it's just empty. There was no nutrition in that for you. There was nothing great in it. Same like Rahu in places like the 11th house, right? Just gain. Oh, these people can make so much money, but it's just empty. They're not getting anything or anywhere. And so eventually that Rahu does switch in our lives. And they just realize the futility of it, the emptiness of that desire. And that's really, well, the best way to control that desire is realize that there's nothing in it. It's just a dead thing, which is, again, Rahu and Ketu are just the dead things. They're not real. They don't really exist. There's no real life in them. And so that's a sort of, we think they're life. We think that it's everything, but there's nothing there. It's just an empty sort of husk. And so that's Rahu and Ketu. So we get very carried away by them, of course, because we're like, wow, look at Rahu juggle. He's juggling chainsaws and fire. Wow, I can't take my eyes off that car wreck that just happened. And so we're while you're watching the car wreck, bang, you're running into the car in front of you because, well, there's a big blind spot. So that's sort of the Rahu Ketu. Funny, I'm in the same condition I was in Guatemala. The sun is chasing me more and more now over to my little shady spot. Like, no, I want to stay in the Rahu shade. Where nobody can see me and just hide out back here. And that's Rahu provides all of that too, like the niche marketplaces, the technology, right? That's one of our greatest fascinations. So I said at the beginning, like, you want to make something new, you want to make some new technology. Well, there's going to be all these sort of drawbacks that you're not sort of seeing. And that's really that Rahu is all that technology, all that new, that all that a drive to move forward, that drive to sort of meet the future. And while we all have to, we all start in this place where we don't know anything. It's this beautiful story. I think I told you guys this before when Parvati, you know, she wanted to marry Shiva. She knew that's all she ever wanted to do. And so she goes out to the forest and it's like, well, how do you worship Lord Shiva? And she doesn't know, nobody's telling her. And so she's like, well, first I just offered to Lord Shiva the kind of flowers and the nuts and berries of the forest that I would like to have offered to me. And so we do that. We sort of offer to these energies what we think they would like. And over time we learn, oh, you like this, you don't like that. You like that, you don't like that. And so we do that with our own lives. So a lot of experiment, but even like, if you want to change your life, if you want to get somewhere, you want to start to do the impossible, that's also always starting from a place of like, you don't know, man. You just don't know where that's going to bring you. You don't know how exactly that future thing is going to look. And well, that's a lot of the smoke and mirrors. That's a lot of that sort of, yeah. But I think there's a side of us, this is the tantric side, where it's like, you go for it and you do it anyways, because we live on this plane of existence that kind of, we have to appease two opposing realities. We have to appease a spiritual reality and we have to appease a material reality. And it's like, ideally, we sort of learn to do this as one action. But I think a big part of getting there and learning that is we appease some of the material, then the spiritual, and we sort of go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until they start to sort of blend together more and more and more, until all of our activity is sort of, and that you could say would be the kriya sort of activity, that spontaneous activity where there's no grasping after wanting something in the future. There's no grasping onto those things that are falling away in the past. You're kind of taking what's coming, you're accepting it, you're doing what you can with it, you're kind of doing your best with this reality and trying to sort of, I guess what doing the best might mean is trying to realize the deepest essence of this reality that you can. That's like getting the juice out of life, right? The nectar of life is really, it's that essence. And I don't know if I mentioned this in the Venus period, but yeah, I did actually. I talked about this. Like Venus is Shukracharya. Venus is the subtle essence. Ayurvedically, it's our sperm, the male sperm. And this is like the most refined part of our existence, in a sense, of most refined part of who we are. And so then we're able to pass that refined part on of who we are to somebody else. And then you get this blend of the two. It's quite magical, actually. But really, it's that kind of an essence that we're trying to sort of realize in ourselves, and we're trying to see that in others. And if you can do that, if you can see that essence in people, that spirit that sort of like deeper than their body, deeper than this life, deeper than all of the distractions of Rahu and Ketu and Maya, then that's what's going to kind of make you a sadhu, make you a baba. Like, I don't know, see, everybody's always talking about enlightenment and these kinds of things, and Shaivism and sort of things. It's like, well, one of the key things about the road to enlightenment is to be able to see another human being as enlightened for you. And this is kind of a guru is the one that holds the light in a sense. And so it's to see someone else where you think, oh, wow, that person's, they must be an enlightened person because I've never met anyone like them before in a sense. And so once you start to see that in one person, then you realize it's kind of possible on this plane. It's like, well, if there's one enlightened person, that means there can be more. And then you think, well, jeepers, golly, maybe I can even be enlightened someday. And so then the sort of test of that is the more and more you can sort of see enlightened people out in the world, it's sort of a testament to your own enlightenment in a sense. And so when you start to see the whole world as enlightened, then, well, then you're kind of quite an enlightened person if that's all you see. And the same thing would be with regards to Shiva. It's like if all you see out in that world when you look outside of you is Shiva, well, then you are also Shiva, without a doubt in anybody's mind. And of course, you can't fake it what you see. You can tell, I can tell you, oh, all I see is Shiva. So I'm Shiva. And I can say what I want, right? Oh, all I see is enlightened people everywhere. But you really know the difference. It's like on the other side of that, it's the person who just sees stupid, dumb, idiot people everywhere. Right? And we do that sometimes ourselves. We're like, oh, that idiot people. Oh God, why? Oh, why are people like this? Right? And it's a testament to just how unenlightened we are, certainly at that moment, right? And so you want to be able to see like everybody as kind of a guru, as an enlightened figure. They're teaching you something, right? Even that, oh, idiot person. Well, they just taught you a lesson, man. Who's the guru and who's the idiot person that can't pick up the lesson? So go ahead, Emmett. You had a hand.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like we have to hit the balance of like to tie in what you just said about Venus. So there's the churning of the ocean between Rahu and Ketu, right? And then that gives us the liquor, the liquid of immortality, which in a way is Venus, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like hitting the balance of Rahu and Ketu is a way of balancing our desires to hit the right point of Venus, where we're giving ourselves a long, pleasure-filled life, rather than picking Venus, our desires, or chasing our desires, Rahu, or letting go of our desires, which is Ketu. So it's like playing the trifecta of all of those three sounds like the way to get the right churning. And then when you're saying Venus is like the semen or the egg, or an ovary for a woman, it's like, so as you're churning between Rahu and Ketu, you're creating that Venus in a way to kind of, because Venus is the key to immortality, right, at the end of the day as well, which is what Rahu and Ketu are trying to kind of unleash or tug and pull across.
It's like the immortality, there's a couple ways we can look at it, but in one sense, the immortality is the moment. The moment is everlasting. This, like, I'm always in, like, if you're always in the moment, then you're always in the moment. The moment just keeps going on forever, right? There's no past or future. All of that dissolves away.
We're always churning.
Yeah. And that's like, well, in that regard, when they're churning the ocean of milk, it's kind of that pivot point as well, where the Mount Mandara had to sit on the back of the tortoise. And the tortoise is on like the four pillars of elephants who's sitting on the foot of a snake. And so you've got a snake on the bottom and a snake on top. And you've got this whole sort of like pile. I like that it's on a tortoise because Native American culture, I don't know if you guys are interested in Native American culture, there's a really nice author. What's his name? Oh, darn it. I was about to say Stephen King, but it's not him. He's another king. Anyways, he's a Native American author in Canada. He writes about a lot of these myths in really, really kind of fun, nice ways. But a lot of the Native American myths, it's like, oh, it's like, where was the beginning? Oh, it's just tortoises all the way down. Oh, we're on the back of another tortoise, on the back of another tortoise, on that back. And Oh, never mind that. It's tortoises all the way down. And so you see these sort of parallels in a lot of different sort of original creation myths, or what is the earth on, or these sorts of things. Where do we come from? Like, well, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Well, what are the giants standing on? Well, bigger giants. It's just giants all the way down, kind of idea. And so, so like this. So there's only, I don't know, there's only about 10 minutes left in class. Are there any more sort of questions or anything about Rahu and Ketu that I maybe didn't cover that you're like, well, what about this aspect of them or that? Or, God, they're so fascinating. There's so many different little myths of them out there. They're really, I find them funny in the astrological world because like everybody is so fascinated on Rahu and Ketu. They completely like, they'll ignore everything else that's going on. It's just like Rahu and Ketu are everything. In a sense, it's kind of like this injunction of like, don't worship idols. And really, you see that in the astrological communities, this kind of worship of this Rahu and Ketu, these idols. And I don't think idols necessarily meant like us don't worship statues or things like that. I think really it was like, don't put things up on a pedestal and worship it. Like, come on, have some common sense here, you know, be reasonable in a sense. And so it's very easy in Rahu periods, especially, to sort of like put things or put people up on pedestals and almost worship them. You don't see them for who they are. You see them for who you think they are. You see only your projection. So you're not seeing any really real truth or reality in Rahu and Ketu. You're just seeing your own foolish mind. And really, I think that's more or less what that sort of spiritual injunction means. Don't worship idols. Well, right, the biggest idol is that one of idol worship in your own mind. So don't put things on pedestals like that. Be realistic, see them for who they are. What, of course, happens at the end of a Rahu period is we blame it all on the Rahu figure, actually, and we don't take any of the personal responsibility for our own stupidity of not seeing, not wanting to see, almost like just ignoring those things. And we go, oh, and then this person, finally, they revealed themselves to me. And I saw who they really were, you know, kind of thing. And it's like, well, finally you opened your stupid eyes. Like, come on, man, don't blame it on them. So it's really tricky working with these energies because we think we got it right. We think we're like, we're hitting it. We're kind of like, we're nailing it until the end comes and we go, oh my God. And so there's a lot of that sort of shame that comes in Rahu and a lot of those sort of shadowy feelings that we'd rather avoid in a lot of ways. I don't know, can we say like push them out to the farthest ends of the universe in a sense? Which I think is what that Rahu Ketu's doing. It splits the universe. So you have a near and a far, so that you have a hot and a cold. It's really that original polarity of energy, of magnetic force of the world. And I think when we're talking about energy, like certain areas where I feel almost ashamed that I don't know more about electromagnetic energy, for example. It's like, come on, Mike, you're teaching a course on energy. And really, in a sense, it's all electromagnetic energy. All energy is energy in a sense. And so like I feel, I'm sorry, guys, right? You just got a Rahu and a Rahu, what a Guru Chanda yoga, maybe. I don't have that in my chart, but maybe you guys do. I think only Dana really knows what I'm saying there. She's laughing the hardest at it. But it's just sort of like, again, they're kind of these, if we allow Rahu and Ketu to do it, they'll show us our gaps in knowledge. They'll show us where our gaps in learning are. Again, be aware of that space in between. So also be aware of those gaps in knowledge, those gaps of awareness, those places you miss, those places other people aren't looking. We kind of have to look there. Those places that we seem to be, we look at our behavior and we're like, well, maybe I'm avoiding that energy. And so you have to then go, okay, well, let's see if I'm avoiding it, and turn around and face it for a minute and say, hello there, energy. Am I avoiding you? And see what's happening there. This was sort of like one of those tantric things, like you see it in India still today, you hear the stories of it. Never really know what to think about this sort of thing, of course, because so there's a sort of sense where they want to sort of like show off their power in a sense. And so in India, you'll see these Naga Babas like with a big rock strapped to their penis, and they're walking around with like 40, 50 pounds hanging from their penis and just sort of swaying in the wind like that. And you'll see them try, these gurus want to attain these great feats. And it's like they want to show off their power. They want to sort of test their powers in a sense. And so there's a sense of like, well, that's kind of foolish, because if you have any real power, then you know you have that power and you don't have to test it. And well, if you have power, you don't have to show it off, because you're showing it off, you're just going to like, well, it's like ejaculating all over the street, and then your power is going to get lost on this stupid showing off thing. And of course, there's lots of karmic things involved with that as well. But there is this sort of sense, and that's not Rahu and Ketu, I think. It wants to see for itself in a sense. It wants to test our limits. It wants to test our boundaries. It wants to test our understanding of reality in a sense. And so in a big way, they are sort of putting us to these sort of tests. Ketu is these spiritual tests. Rahu is sort of these materialistic tests. And so you hear of these like old tantric babas. It's like, well, they might go sit in, who was it? Matsendranath, for example. He's the big guru of Tantra, Gorakhnath. Matsendranath was his guru. So Gorakhnath wandered all over India looking for Matsendranath. And finally someone says, oh, he's in Goa. So Gorakhnath goes to Goa. What does he find? He finds his Guruji completely drunk, surrounded by a bunch of like dancing girls, basically. Same as you would find in Goa, just enjoying himself. But in a way, this was sort of this like, it's a sort of test in a sense. It's like, even drunk and even surrounded by all these women, I'm not going to lose control of my command over my senses. It's like you can still sit amongst all of that. You don't have to avoid our desires. We have to sort of control them, right? And so you can still be there. You can still enjoy all the beauty and the pleasures of life. By the way, men are wired a little differently for women. And so our idea of heaven is basically just a bunch of dancing girls around us. We're really simple that way. And if we're repressing anything, it's repressing that desire for a bunch of dancing women around us. And so we want to be able to control ourselves amongst that as well, though, without sort of getting carried away with it. That's really the whole point. And so these tantric they always want to test themselves. And what we notice when we get on any spiritual path, regardless of what we're going for, is life seems to want to test us. It pushes us to these sort of tests all the time. It's like, you say you're liberated, you're free, and you're happy. It's like, well, it's like, I think it was Osho that said, or maybe it was Ram Dass, probably both of them. Go and visit your family for a little while and find out how enlightened you are. And so life will set up these tests anyways for us, really sort of push us to, well, I find as soon as I say anything and open my mouth and put it out loud, life is like, oh, is that really true? And life will just have a way of sort of like, is that really how you feel? Is that really your inner sort of truth? And so that's kind of this Rahu and Ketu energy in a sense. It's this side of life where it seems beyond real, where it's just like, how does that keep happening like that? Like, it's not part of the mechanics of the universe that life, like, I tell people I'm afraid of water, and the next thing I know, I'm out in a little boat in the middle of the ocean, right? And it's like, let's see how afraid you are. And I'm like, well, that was a pretty good fear, because I broke a lot of bones in 3 weeks and they just dumped me on the shore somewhere. And so prairie dog legs. I can't, that whole boat thing moving and stuff, just leave me on land. I'm better off. And so I didn't overcome my fear of water. I kind of confirmed that, yeah, just stay away from that. But it's just funny how like that's not a mechanical energy that puts me to the test as soon as I say that. That's much deeper. It's in the energy that we put out there. It's with the energy. It's like almost like telling life sometimes, like, test me on this. I think I got this one. Test me. Let's see if it's true. And so that's a lot of that Rahu Ketu, that sort of underlying reality. The senses tantrics, that's what we're trying to connect to, is see and witness that reality that's underlying this reality, that deeper reality. From a perspective, like Sanjay always used to tell me, he's like Vedanta, Brahmin path and India Orthodoxy, he says it's very sort of cold and dry. Not much is happening. So the Tantra is always going to be kind of hot and wet. And so wet is sort of that emotionality that comes in. The wetness is those attachments that we're going to get when we take the time to really see inside of someone. There's going to be some kind of emotional attachment is going to come there. There's going to be some kind of a bonding. That's that wetness. And very fluid, very changeable all the time. And so that's that sort of wet, you could say the moon energy, the mystic energy is very wet this way, emotional, very kind of messy, right? It can get not tantric dangerous, but like tantric messiness. And that's because of that wetness. And then there's a lot of heat in the Tantra because, well, heat is the energy of transformation. And so you get the wet and heat, and so you get the kind of hot and steamy sort of things as well. And even it's easy to go into the sexual metaphors with Tantra, but it's also making those connections with just anything that's really important to us, really seeing into it deeply, getting to know it, the own self, the own body, the own mind, our own soul, and really almost getting that sort of. And you see it again, a lot of people, they go through this sort of period in the ashrams. Like ashrams, I don't know if you guys have all spent time in ashrams, they're basically insane asylums. Like they're really messy. Like this is where people go to deal with their shit. And so the shit is sort of coming out in the ashrams. And then the ones who sort of stay in the ashrams, I'm not a big fan of this sort of thing because I think then they get caught up in the ashram shit in a sense. And so it just keeps going through all the cycles of all of that. The best is go to the ashram, deal with your shit, go outside and rebuild your life sort of idea on a firmer foundation and all of that kind of thing. But so you get this sort of like very early on, like I think there's a lot of this sort of shadow work and stuff people talk about as some of these early stages of spirituality. And that sort of is dealing with the shit. And that is sort of like, well, if you think that you have some latent desires, go and put yourself in the middle of that and find out if that desire needs fulfilling or not. And so you're in the middle of it. Well, you can either fulfill that and carry on with your life, realize it's emptiness, or you can realize actually I have no attachment to that. That's you could say quite literally a dead area of your life. That's sort of like we have no desire for everything. If we don't feel it. If we don't connect to it deeply, it's just a dead thing. And it's really when we connect to the spirit, when we see that inner spirit, that inner essence of a person, a thing, or what it is, that's where we see it's alive. That's where we ourselves come alive. Again, that sort of sense of like you're going to see in deeply into somebody else, you see yourself. And so it's that, well, when you connect with the spirit, that's that source of life itself. And so then we're fed, we're satisfied, we're happy, we're babies at mama's milk, like this. There's that Chamunda? Chamunda with the head cut off? She's one of the really dark sort of Devis. Chamunda, she's got her head cut off. She's holding her head. She's got two streams of blood shooting up, and it's feeding her attendants. Dana, that's Chamunda, right? Yeah.
Hinamasta.
Chinnamasta, yeah. Chinnamasta, yeah. Chamunda, yeah. Okay, that's, yeah, Durga. So Chinnamasta, she's this, I knew you would know that. So Chinnamasta, she's nourishing her attendants with her own lifeblood, and they're being fulfilled, and she's helping them to sort of fulfill themselves, fulfill their path. You could say that's one of the things of like a great mother or a great sort of parental figure, as someone who they help the children. They're fulfilled through helping others fulfill their path, and helping others fulfill their destiny is what they get fulfilled by. It's sort of some of the, anyways, the darker context of Chinnamasta, as this sense of sharing her own lifeblood with them to fulfill them, sacrificing ourselves for those who come behind us. And really, it's like when you sacrifice yourself for the world around you, for the society or the people you're with, everybody rises, right? Whenever you do something selfish and only for yourself, it's like everybody sinks. And so it's like, again, Rahu is that sort of myth that if I do things for myself, I can make things better. If I just look out for numero uno here, look out for number one, I can rise above all these other inferior sort of people around me. And so what we see is, and I was talking that politically about the USA, is they're sort of like, they want to remain on top, but they're doing that by dragging the whole world down with them. And so it's like, well, we're all going to be stuck in the mud. And while wonderful USA, you've got your head above water, while the rest of us are completely stuck. Whereas, well, for 50 years, they're kind of like helping these other nations, and the whole world was kind of rising up together. And well, now we got this wonderful middle-class lives, and most people, at least in the West, are doing pretty good because we all got to kind of come up together. And there was a lot of sort of sacrifice their own needs for the needs of the greater good sort of thing. And so, again, Rahu and Ketu become this sort of counterintuitive, or what could I say? They make us think we know the truth when we don't know anything, really. And so, well, we're at 5 after 12 now. And so if there's any other questions, I can deal with those. And otherwise, I'll let you guys get on with your day. I'll be actually sending out a bunch of writing in the next couple days. Rahu and Ketu is very close to finished. Venus, I started 4 different versions, and so I still have to chop 3 of them out and paste a bunch of them together and that kind of stuff. But it's coming. It's Memphis is, all the great musicians wrote here, and so hopefully I'll get some of the magic and do some writing myself. So anyways, Mahadev, guys, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. See you tomorrow,
Anji.
hopefully.
Yes, indeed.
Mahadev.
Mahadev.
Or do you have to go now?
No, I've got